My family bullied me for being the ugly sibling, but now I'm marrying a wealthy man and they're begging for a wedding invite. I'm a 23-year-old woman, and I grew up in a middle-class family that included my parents and my older sister, Sabrina, who's now 25. Both of my parents were academics, so naturally, they had sky-high expectations for Sabrina and me. Sabrina was the golden child, a brilliant student with the charm and beauty of a Greek goddess. Me? I didn't quite measure up academically, wasn't much to look at, and carried extra weight. But even as a little girl, I showed real talent when it came to art. You know, people who claim looks don't matter in this world probably never had to deal with being called ugly. I say that because I felt the sting of judgment about my appearance, even within my own family. I could understand the lectures about my grades, they had a purpose, but it always hurt when my parents threw in comments about how I looked. They'd say things like I wouldn't even make a believable dumb blonde if everything else fell apart. They compared me to Sabrina constantly. Sabrina rarely spoke up, but I could feel it. Whenever we walked to school together, she'd glance at me like she wished she could vanish rather than be seen next to me. Even at family gatherings, when a relative tried to say something nice about me, my parents would jump in with jokes at my expense, comparing my face to some animals. Sure, they'd get some awkward chuckles from the guests, they were the hosts, after all, but those digs cut deep. Over time, I began to believe that being unattractive was my fault, which did a number on my confidence. I became the quiet kid at school, avoiding people and activities because I was terrified of being judged. One afternoon, while I was sitting alone in an empty classroom sketching, my school counselor happened to notice me. She suggested I join a poster-making contest, but I immediately refused. Sensing something deeper, she struck up a conversation and got me to open up. After hearing my story, she called my parents and urged them to get me therapy, pointing out that their constant criticism was damaging me. My parents, not wanting to seem neglectful, reluctantly agreed. Therapy turned out to be a game changer. Over the next few years, I slowly started rebuilding my sense of self-worth. But my parents? They didn't let up on the snide remarks. Every jab at my looks came with a suggestion that I should learn to take a joke. That's when I decided I was out of there the moment I turned 18. My 18th birthday came around, but of course, it wasn't about me. The party turned into a Sabrina appreciation event. Sabrina landed a modeling gig. Sabrina got into a prestigious college. Sabrina was the star. It was my aunt who finally spoke up, reminding everyone that it was my birthday and maybe we should celebrate that. Her words hung awkwardly in the air because my family didn't appreciate the interruption. They stayed quiet for the rest of the evening, even during the cake cutting. That night, I cried in my room. The next day, I called a friend who helped me find a small apartment. With the money I'd saved from my part-time job, I could afford to move out. No one in my family seemed to care when I packed my things. They didn't even notice I was leaving until they saw me loading boxes into my friend's car. Their parting words? At least the house will look nicer without your stuff cluttering it up. Sabrina surprised me, though. She handed me a book she liked as a farewell gift. After moving out, I threw myself into work and studies. I discovered a passion for software engineering and managed to get into a respected college program. I thought this achievement might earn some recognition from my parents, so I reached out to invite them to my graduation. When I arrived at their house, the door was locked. After several calls, they finally answered, telling me they couldn't make it because they were on vacation. I mentioned my college admission, hoping they might offer support like they did for Sabrina. Their response? A dismissive, "Oh, that's great. Good for you." Deflated, I went to my aunt's house instead. She comforted me, promised to be there for my graduation, and became my go-to family from that point on. A month later, I moved to another city for college. Fast forward 6 years, and I was working as a software engineer while freelancing as a graphic designer on the side. My relationship with my parents had dwindled to nothing. The only time I heard from them was for big family events where I was usually the butt of their jokes, so I stopped attending altogether. My aunt noticed and began inviting me to spend holidays with her instead, making me feel like I hadn't completely lost a family. At work, the environment was casual, with little emphasis on hierarchy. One day, the company needed a new logo, so I volunteered and ended up paired with a colleague I'd never met before. Let's call him Wesley. Over the next 3 months, Wesley and I worked closely together and became good friends. That friendship grew into something more, and by the time our project wrapped up, we were dating. It wasn't until later that I found out Wesley was actually the CEO and founder of the company, though it didn't change how I saw him. He was just Wesley to me. A year into our relationship, Wesley proposed in the most magical way on a trip to Paris. I was over the moon, and my aunt was the first person I told. The next day, I sent an email to my parents about the engagement and posted the news on Facebook for the extended family. To my surprise, my mom called me for only the third time in 7 years. She sounded thrilled and invited me to a private family dinner the following weekend. The dinner wasn't at their house but at a fancy restaurant. When I arrived, my parents and Sabrina were already there. Sabrina, I learned, was struggling between jobs after college. My parents were unusually kind to me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was up. At the dinner, my parents and Sabrina seemed eager to discuss the wedding. They asked about my plans, and I casually mentioned that I hadn't figured much out yet. That's when the mask slipped, and their real intentions came out. They started pleading with me to involve them in the wedding. The sudden desperation caught me off guard, but I didn't hold back. I told them straight that the decision would be mine alone and that they had no right to demand anything after being absent from my life for nearly 7 years, only showing up when it suited them. The room fell silent, and I signaled for the check. I assumed we'd split the bill, but they had other ideas. Apparently, because I was marrying a rich guy, they expected me to cover the entire thing. By that point, I'd had enough. I paid the bill, stood up, and left without a word. Later, I shared everything with Wesley, who reassured me that this wedding would be exactly what I wanted, with only the people I truly cared about there. But my parents didn't back down. The phone calls started pouring in, with them pressuring me to include them in the wedding because, according to them, family comes first. At first, I resisted. After all, I still hadn't forgotten that disastrous dinner. But after hearing them repeatedly apologize for how they treated me growing up, I decided to be the bigger person and give them another shot. I told my dad he could walk me down the aisle, while my mom and Sabrina could be my bridesmaids. They seemed thrilled with the arrangement. Things started to unravel, though, when it came time for wedding shopping. They picked out the priciest items they could find and expected me to foot the bill. I stood my ground, saying I'd send them budget-friendly references and that they'd need to cover the costs themselves. They tried to sweet-talk me into changing my mind, but I wasn't falling for it. 5 months before the wedding, Wesley and I decided to host an engagement announcement party in my city. The guest list would help us finalize who'd be invited to the wedding. Naturally, I included my family and a good number of relatives. Since Wesley was the CEO of his company, it was no secret that several prominent figures would be attending the event. My parents, at least for the moment, seemed happy just to be included. Not long after, I got a call from my aunt, who insisted we meet in person as soon as possible. When we met, she looked worried and didn't waste time getting to the point. She had overheard my parents planning something shady for the engagement party. Apparently, their financial situation had taken a hit after Sabrina's college expenses, and with my dad retired and Sabrina jobless, they were struggling to maintain appearances. When they found out I was marrying someone wealthy, they decided to mend fences, not out of love, but in hopes of turning me into their personal bank account. Since I'd shut down their initial attempts to manipulate me, they had devised a new, more underhanded plan. My aunt explained that they planned to use Sabrina as my maid of honor to try to match her up with one of the groomsmen. When that idea seemed unlikely to work, they came up with something worse. They'd bought a cheap knockoff necklace online, intending to show it to me at the party and claim it was Sabrina's. The plan was to slip the necklace into my bag, accuse me of stealing it, and create a scene. The goal? To humiliate me in front of the guests and guilt Wesley into giving them money. Hearing this, I was furious and heartbroken. I couldn't believe the lengths my own family would go to. My aunt tried to comfort me and asked what I wanted to do. After thinking it through, I decided to turn the tables on them. I told her to help me get an identical copy of the necklace. Once my mom placed her knockoff in my bag, I'd quietly move it into her bag. The plan was simple: when she accused me, I'd expose her in front of everyone. My aunt agreed without hesitation. The day of the engagement party arrived, and everything seemed perfect. My mom had no idea I was onto her. She showed me the necklace, acting as though it was a prized possession, and shortly after, she started yelling that it had gone missing. I played along, pretending to be confused. She called over my dad and Sabrina and started making a scene, accusing me of losing it because I'd been the last person to see it. Feigning calm, I suggested she check her bag first before pointing fingers. She resisted, so I grabbed her bag and opened it in front of everyone. There it was, the same necklace she claimed I had stolen. The room fell completely silent as I held up the necklace in front of everyone. My family's faces turned pale, and the murmurs around us grew louder. I could hear the whispers, people speculating about what had just unfolded. Before my parents or Sabrina could say a word, I spoke up, my voice clear and steady. "I want to make one thing very clear," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You may have gotten away with blaming me for things when I was a kid, but that's not happening anymore. I might not have been the prettiest or most polished in this family, but I've got something far more valuable: integrity. And that's what counts in the real world." My parents stood there, visibly humiliated, saying nothing. They avoided eye contact for the rest of the party and left early, clearly embarrassed. The next morning, my phone was filled with voicemails. My parents, along with a few relatives, accused me of overreacting and dragging up the past when they had been trying to make amends. They claimed the necklace incident wasn't deliberate and criticized me for attacking their character in front of everyone. At the time, I felt justified in what I'd said, but as I thought about it more, I began to question myself. Maybe embarrassing them like that was enough. Maybe I shouldn't have made those comments about their character. It felt like stooping to their level. Still, the damage was done. Update 1. Thank you to everyone who offered advice about my situation. Many of you suggested cutting my family off completely after everything they've done. While I understand that perspective, I've never seriously considered doing that. Despite everything, they're still my family. After showing my aunt this post and reading through the comments with her, she suggested I sit down and have an honest conversation with my parents. It sounded reasonable. I wanted to at least give them the chance to explain themselves. A week after the engagement party, I went to their house for dinner. They hadn't reached out to me since the voicemail incident, so I wasn't sure what kind of reception I'd get. When I arrived, they were distant and cold, barely speaking unless I initiated. After dinner, I decided to address the elephant in the room. I told them I knew about their plan at the engagement party. Their silence wasn't arrogance, it was guilt. They had nothing to say in their defense. I took the opportunity to get everything off my chest. I told them how much their behavior over the years had hurt me and how I had spent most of my life feeling like an outsider in my own family. To my surprise, they apologized. It wasn't defensive or dismissive, just genuine apologies for everything they'd done, including the engagement party fiasco. While I appreciated their words, I couldn't bring myself to trust them completely, not yet. With the wedding approaching, I decided to make an effort to include them in some of the planning, hoping to rebuild the relationship. I invited my mom and Sabrina to accompany my aunt and me to my final wedding dress fitting. At the fitting, my aunt got emotional seeing me in my dress, which warmed my heart. But my mom and Sabrina's reactions were indifferent: no smiles, no compliments, just neutral expressions. When I asked if they thought anything needed to be added to my look, they simply shrugged. After I changed out of the dress, Sabrina approached me with a stunning satin gown she thought would be perfect for the bridesmaids. It was gorgeous, but when she saw the price tag, she said they couldn't afford it and put it back on the rack. I didn't offer to pay for it then, but later, I decided to buy the gowns as a gift for my mom and Sabrina. The following days were filled with tension. My parents and Sabrina began imposing small suggestions for the wedding, changing the flower arrangements, tweaking the guest list, altering the timeline of events. I held firm, telling them politely but firmly that I'd reach out if I needed their input. A few hours after they left my house, I got a call from my mom. At first, I thought it was intentional, but then I realized she had accidentally but dialed me. As I was about to hang up, I heard her and Sabrina talking. Their conversation was cruel. They mocked my wedding dress, saying I couldn't pull it off in a million years. They couldn't believe I'd landed someone like Wesley, laughing that I wouldn't even qualify to be a maid in his house. They called me an uptight B-word and joked about how they wished they could access my money without ever having to see me again. I sat there in shock, tears streaming down my face. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The people I was trying so hard to reconnect with were ridiculing me like textbook bullies. The next day, I called my aunt and told her everything. She came over immediately, comforting me and reminding me that I had all the power in this situation. She also pointed out that, by pure coincidence, my phone's call recorder had been on during the accidental call. Now, I had proof of what they'd said in case they tried to deny it. Update 2. After much thought, I've decided to cut ties with my family, but not without addressing everything first. I called my dad to meet with him privately, hoping he might offer a different perspective. When we met, I told him about the boutique incident, the butt-dialed call, and everything I'd endured over the years. Instead of showing support, he turned the conversation on me. He accused me of forgetting my place and said he was tired of walking on eggshells around me. That was the final straw. I realized then that I'd never be able to repair the relationship, no matter how hard I tried. When my dad said I should be grateful for everything they'd done for me until I turned 18, I felt like I'd been slapped in the face. He told me I owed them for raising me, that they were the reason I was even standing there, criticizing them. I was appalled. I took a deep breath, fighting back tears, and replied, "If you wanted help, you should have just asked. Instead, you used me as a punchline in family jokes and spent years comparing me to Sabrina. Maybe if you'd bothered to build a real relationship with me, I'd have understood your struggles without you needing to say a word." He didn't back down. His cold expression made it clear he wasn't going to take any responsibility. That's when it hit me, this wasn't my family, not really. They never had been. They'd sidelined me, traumatized me, and only showed up when they thought they could benefit from me. I didn't say another word. I just left. For 2 days, I heard nothing from anyone, which told me my dad hadn't shared our conversation with my mom or Sabrina. I finally had time to think. With help from Wesley and my aunt, I came up with a plan, a way to confront them and expose their hypocrisy once and for all. The idea was simple: I'd throw a small bachelorette party and only invite my aunt, my mom, and Sabrina. We'd do it at a private location where I could set up cameras to record everything. The plan was to play a little game of truth or dare, asking questions about the things they'd said during their private conversation. If they lied, I'd have proof. If they told the truth, their hypocrisy would be out in the open. The following weekend, the bachelorette party happened. My mom and Sabrina were thrilled about the all-expenses-paid night out and quickly got tipsy. They were unusually sweet to me, laughing and acting like we were best friends. Clearly, they had no idea I knew what they'd said. When the game started, I eased into it with harmless questions. They didn't suspect anything at first, but when I started bringing up topics from their private conversation, their smiles faded. They sobered up quickly, deflecting and lying through their teeth. That's when I pulled out my phone and played the audio of their call. They were stunned into silence. But after a moment, their real personalities came through. They started spewing venom, badmouthing me right there in front of my aunt. They called me undeserving of my life, saying Sabrina was the real prodigy of the family. They even admitted they never considered me part of the family and said I was selfish for not helping them financially. It hurt to hear those things, but I stayed strong. "I want you both to know," I said firmly, "that you're being recorded right now. If you don't want this video on Facebook for everyone to see, you'll accept that you're no longer part of my wedding. I would have disinvited you altogether, but I don't want the drama to overshadow my day. After the wedding, I won't see either of you again. And don't think for a second that you can use me for privileges or money in the future. Also, return the dresses I bought you or pay me for them." They were furious. Without another word, they called a cab and stormed out. That night, my aunt and I stayed at the venue and turned it into a celebration. We laughed, toasted to the victory, and talked about how far I'd come despite everything. I asked her if she would walk me down the aisle instead of my dad. She cried tears of joy and said yes. Update 3. I know it's been a while since my last update, but life got busy, especially with the wedding, which is why this post is so late. Thank you to everyone who congratulated me. After the bachelorette, I thought things would settle down. I warned my mom and Sabrina to keep a low profile until the wedding. For the most part, they did. But a week later, I still hadn't gotten the dresses back. I didn't want to stir up any drama so close to my big day, so I decided to deal with it after the wedding. That same day, my aunt called me, her voice full of urgency, telling me to check Facebook. What I saw made my stomach churn. My entire family had posted a massive 5-part rant, accusing me of torturing them ever since I came into money. They fabricated lies, dug up childhood mischiefs, and twisted them into something evil. It was all an effort to paint me as some kind of monster. The worst part? They ended their rant by asking for help because, according to them, I was blackmailing them for money. To top it off, they doxed me by posting my phone number, which led to an onslaught of calls from relatives, either trying to guilt me into reconciling or fishing for a wedding invite. My aunt tried defending me in the comments, calling out their lies, but her comments were swiftly deleted. Thankfully, some people saw through the madness and called them out for airing my childhood mistakes so ruthlessly. My parents' only response was to claim that they had lived through it and didn't expect anyone else to understand their pain. When I showed Wesley the posts, his immediate reaction was that we should sue them for defamation and harassment. But I didn't want to waste more of my energy on them. Instead, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I went online and released the audio recordings I had of them calling me names and mocking me for being ugly. I posted my side of the story, explaining everything they had done, and made it very clear that they were no longer invited to my wedding. I also demanded that they either return the dresses I'd gifted them or reimburse me, otherwise, my lawyer would be in touch. Their reaction was predictable. They thought I was bluffing and tried to intimidate me into backing down. But when I released the videos, it was game over. The backlash they faced was overwhelming, and suddenly, the tide turned in my favor. People who had been supporting them now saw the truth and began calling them out. Even my maternal grandmother reached out, begging me to forgive them. I told her she was welcome to stay on their side if she felt so strongly, but she wouldn't be part of my life either. That shut the conversation down fast, and she soon changed her tune. The weeks leading up to the wedding were stressful, to say the least. I hired security for the venue, fully expecting my family to cause trouble, and they didn't disappoint. On the wedding day, my mom and Sabrina showed up wearing the dresses I'd gifted them, acting like nothing had happened. They were promptly denied entry by security. I watched from a window as they threw a full-blown tantrum in the parking lot, demanding to be let in. Wesley stepped in, warning them to leave or face trespassing charges. Seeing they had no other option, they stormed off, but not without hurling curses in my direction. The cherry on top? My mom accidentally stepped on a sprinkler on the way out, drenching both herself and Sabrina, completely ruining their outfits. It felt like poetic justice. After that, the wedding went off without a hitch. My aunt walked me down the aisle, a moment that brought tears to my eyes. Most of my guests from my side of the family apologized for my parents' behavior, but I told them to forget about it and just enjoy the celebration. And they did. Update 4, the final chapter. This will be my last update on this whole saga. After the wedding, while Wesley and I were on our honeymoon, I received the dresses back in the mail. They were completely ruined, thanks to the sprinkler fiasco, but honestly, it wasn't about the dresses, it was about making a point. Wesley still thinks we should file a case against them for defamation, but I've decided to let it go. They've already humiliated themselves enough, and I have no desire to waste my time or peace of mind on them anymore. The truth is, I've never felt lighter. Cutting ties with them was the best decision I've ever made. My aunt remains my rock, the one person I trust completely. Now that I'm pregnant, I'm so grateful that my child will have her as their grandma, a loving, supportive figure who will show them what real family is supposed to look like. As for my parents and Sabrina? I haven't heard much. Word is, my dad has developed a drinking problem, my mom is still trying to smear my name to whoever will listen, and Sabrina has moved to a new city for a fresh start. She even sent me a half-hearted apology text, but I didn't reply. They were the ones who threw away our relationship over petty jealousy and greed. I've moved on, and I'm happier than I've ever been. I won't let their fake apologies or past toxicity ruin the peace I've finally found.